In this video, I'm going to begin exploring a piece of computing technology I've been wanting to figure out for decades: IBM Token Ring networking. As well as having very iconic cable connectors and infrastructure gear, Token Ring is fundamentally different from Ethernet, the networking technology probably serving up this video to you today. In early Ethernet networks, all computers on the network could talk whenever they pleased, which would lead to collisions when more than one computer tries to use the network at the same time. This problem has been tackled and solved in Ethernet to great effect over the years, but Token Ring took a radically different approach. As the apt name implies, machines are attached to the network in a logical ring. A special packet called a token is passed around, and only one machine at a time is allowed to leverage it to transmit data, thus avoiding the collision problem. But all that isn't too important for today's video. Suffice it to say that Ethernet and Token Ring employ different incompatible topologies, and that Ethernet won in the end. But Token Ring gave Ethernet a run for its money between the mid-1980s and late 1990s, and we're going to explore all sorts of hardware and cabling required to physically construct a Token Ring network. After that, we'll get some relatively era-appropriate Windows 95 machines set up with Token Ring cards, along with all the requisite pain that entails. We'll get dangerously close to building a fully functional Token Ring network, and even hear some mechanical relays click and clack inside the iconic IBM 8228 Token Ring MAU, the equivalent of a hub in the Ethernet world. Let's get into it. I have been slowly acquiring Token Ring gear for the last, I don't know, several years. In fact, I went and looked through the archives, and the first documented pickup was an IBM MCA Token Ring card that I documented on Patreon in fall of 2023. This guy right here, in fact. This has been a really daunting project for me to start because, number one, Token Ring just operates fundamentally differently from the Ethernet we know and love today. Number two, I've never operated a Token Ring network, so I have a lot to learn. And number three, I have a certain fascination for Token Ring, and I think it has a very important place in history. The equipment is just super fascinating, and its trajectory it was on competing with Ethernet, and I want to do it justice. I want to cover this in a way that makes sense and it's enjoyable for everyone to watch. But with any big project, when you hit the point where you're spending more time thinking and less time doing, it's time to just dive in. So what I'm going to do is we're going to look at all these physical items I've got here, and it's no accident that this thing right here is in the middle of everything. This is what's called a MAU. MAU, or MAU, stands for Media Access Unit, and you can think of it as a hub in Ethernet terms. So I've got 8 ports I can connect a computer up to. We've got these special RI and RO ports. This stands for ring in and ring out. You can chain 32 of these together, at least in the case of this pretty iconic IBM 8228 unit. And something incredible about MAUs, or at least this one, is they're totally passive. And by that I mean you don't need to plug power into this thing. All you do is plug your networked devices into it, and we'll get into the details, but they're providing a little bit of power. And inside here are a bunch of relays. Let's just dive right in and open this thing up and have a look. Doesn't look too bad, just some screws around the edge. I think they're a security bit, so I'll have to get up my bit set, and I think this lid will just pop right off. I'll do that now. Well, they are a slightly funny looking star bit, but a flathead screwdriver will also work. I was hoping it'd be as simple as these perimeter screws, but we're still stuck and can't get it open. I think we're gonna have to take these screws off. Also, I don't know why I was getting so excited about security bits. It's just a Torx screw. It also accepts flathead. Pretty simple. This whole front bezel actually had to be unscrewed so that I can lift it off like that. And now, hopefully just this top lid. All right, and we can't see anything. Look at this foam. It's like in really good shape. It's glued on there to push against this. This thing must be 35 years old or something at least. Look at that. Now the question is, can we get in here without breaking anything? I'm not going to go much deeper if it becomes obvious that this isn't going to work out, so I'm sorry to disappoint you. Well, I think I got to loosen a bunch of plastic clips or take this whole thing out, and I don't want to disrupt this foam, which is in really good shape and all glued in there. So here's a picture online of what's going on in here. And basically there's a bunch of relays that these are connected to. And the line that comes in actually provides some voltage, and this thing will connect and disconnect based on if it thinks the item on the ring is healthy, the computer on the ring. And we'll get into that in a lot more detail later. But the point is, there's no power going into this thing other than the machines that are plugged in. I think that's a really unique aspect of these token ring mouse. And let me tell you, this thing smells like the 1980s. You can just tell it's from that era. I probably should have led with this, but another thing that's interesting about token ring are these very unique connectors. These are called IBM Type 1 connectors or IBM data connectors, and they have a unique aspect in that they're genderless. I think the term IBM used is hermaphroditic. And by that I mean you don't have to worry about one pin configuration being on one end of the cable and then the other gender being on the other. You can actually just directly plug two of these identical cables in. So I've got another one here, and as you can see, they will just link right up, which is a pretty impressive design. And this leads me to another part of this complicated connector. It's got these little tabs that you can push in on the sides, and now the thing like won't come apart. These little areas you're supposed to be able to press down and it lifts up a little latch, and you can't press them when those are in. You have to pull them back out, so you can see the top is out, bottom's in. Pull the bottom out now. And now I can lift these little tabs and theoretically disengage the cables. As you might expect, same story here. You can push that in, you can push these tabs in to lock it so it's not falling out of the unit. And if you get a bunch of these, all hooked up, you can imagine it'd be a pretty impressive sight. Here's a slightly more obvious angle for how this mechanism works. So I can press these little tabs and they open up and come out of some latches and it'll fall right out. And if I put it in again, but this time I don't know what those are called, but the locking tabs or whatever, I can't actually press these and it's stuck in there. It's all a little brittle feeling though, so I wonder if these didn't last very long, but I suppose you're not pushing them in and out constantly. Let's keep talking about cabling. So there were at least 3 different types of connectors, to my knowledge, that Token Ring utilized. One is this big old classic, pretty quintessential Token Ring connector, the Type 1, the IBM data connector. But you can see I happen to have one that's going to RJ45, and so that was another very common style. The MAUs, it's pretty typical for them to use these big old guys, and you would interconnect the MAUs with really thick, beefy versions of these that had this connector on both ends to daisy chain the MAUs together. But a lot of the time, the workstation itself, the computer, would use this RJ45 connector. Of note, if we zoom in, there's actually only 4 wires. We have 2 for transmit, 2 for receive, and they're the middle 4 pins, I believe, which comes as no surprise if you take a closer inspection of this guy. There's only these 4 gold contacts here, corresponding to those 4 wires on the other end, and these are just grounding metal pieces, I think. But they also used DB9, and I'll use these cards to illustrate that. I think in the early days of Token Ring, this DB9 connector was common, still only 4 wires going into it. I unfortunately don't have any Token Ring specific DB9 cables, but if push comes to shove, I can pick up some of these adapters. I mean, for all I know, this one works. I'd have to beep out the pins, but you can buy these little guys that are customizable and you can swap the pins however you want. So, well, obviously here's that gender issue again. But this is a solvable problem if for some reason I need to use this specific card. And speaking of cards, we will mostly try to use these RJ45 cards. So this one in particular is an IBM Auto 16.4 Token Ring ISA card. I have 4 of these in case one or more is broken. And you can tell this is probably a later model given how much smaller it is and less complex. Like I was saying, I've got 4 of these. They're all identical in these bags here. And this is probably going to be our workhorse for this whole project. Taking a closer look, it looks like we've got some 1994. Oh, there's a 95 date code, so mid-90s cards here. And I was showing you before, this is the RJ45 style. And you can see, you'll see this 16.4 on the label here. We see IBM Auto 16.4 Token Ring ISA. Token Ring operated at 2 speeds, at least initially, and in our experience down here, it's going to be one or the other, or both maybe. 4 megabits per second or 16 megabits per second. So you'll see that 16.4 stuff all over the place, and that's what that's about, the speed. Those other cards we were looking at were ISA, and this is a PCI card. made by 3Com, and it's complete in box. We will unbox this together when it's time to use it. Oh, and then this is perfect. Here you can see it's got both style connectors, the DB9 and the RJ45, because those are both really common. I'm seeing like a 1997 copyright code on this guy, and I am just barely old enough to know what token ring is. I don't have any firsthand experience with it, but I've always heard of it, I've always known of it. And it's easy to forget, or maybe you're young enough and never even knew. Token ring and Ethernet were really battling head to head. And I think this is a perfect example. This is built by 3Com. 3Com was founded by Bob Metcalfe, one of the co-inventors of Ethernet. So I think it says a lot about how the battle was waging, that the Ethernet guys, 3Com, were making token ring products. I mean, token ring did have a foothold in the networking industry. Oh, and the best thing about token ring is you get all these visuals. So like, here's the ring connected to a LAN that's just Ethernet. Love it. Next, we'll look at some laptop gear. We will definitely be getting some laptops on the ring. And to do that, we're going to be using these PC MCIA cards, or PC cards. I just picked these up on eBay like just this week. And look, I mean, I love the look of this one. Obviously, very classic IBM sleek business. But man, they really blew it out with this one. Holographic token ring Charizard here. Has the dongle. This is a huge problem if you're collecting these PC cards, because obviously that is no standard whatsoever, at least in my opinion. And let's see, which one does this even go to? Must be this one. So you plug that in and you get an RJ45 for your token ring network. But how will I plug RJ45 into this, you might ask? With one of these Type 1 to RJ45 adapters, which came in this eBay lot. I paid $47 US shipped to my house for this, which sounds ridiculous because it is. But it was worth the cost of admission. I would encourage you to go look up the price of these adapters if you can even find them. And yeah, it was worth it just for this thing. So obviously we're good to go there. That'll go right into the MAU and get us on the ring. That's laptops out of the way. We're going to be putting those in this super sweet, chunky IBM ThinkPad, by the way. Look forward to that. And that brings us to these special cards. So just by glimpsing at them, this odd blue plastic bit here, this funny looking connector down here, you can tell something's up, some IBM stuff's going on. These are MCA cards, or micro channel architecture cards, which was IBM's sort of thrashing to try to control the PC industry that they created in the 80s, and Compaq and Microsoft and many others fought back, and the ISA bus won. So all the computers we know and love today, x86, Intel, and all that, they won, but IBM wanted to compete with a totally different IBM-owned architecture called MCA. So we've got this long card here I was showing you earlier. It's got the DB9 there, and then we've got this complete in-box one. It is a Token Ring Network 16.4 Adapter A, which set someone back about $100 US at one point in time. And I think these are going to be much older, early 90s, late 80s, if I had to guess. And that's pretty cool. So this one is much shorter, so it might be newer than this one. I think the longer ones were for servers. We might not even be able to use this, and the shorter ones were for other PS2 machines. I'm seeing some 1991 date codes on that one. Yeah, I don't know what I'm talking about. A 95 date code on this. Long story short, these are a different architecture than the PCs we're familiar with. You can't just slap this in a 486 machine or whatever. It's not PCI, it's not ISA. And the microchannel architecture brings us to one of the reasons, from a nostalgia perspective, that I am fascinated by Token Ring. And it's these IBM PS2 systems. This is a not quite complete in-box unit. I bought this years ago, and I haven't opened it for a while. I can't remember exactly which one it is. In true IBM fashion, they made like a billion iterations of these things. This is what lost out in the end to the PC. Those two cards I was just showing you. Hopefully we can get one of them in here. I've got a couple backups on the way from eBay just in case. Let's take a look at this thing, and I'll tell you why it's relevant to me when it comes to Token Ring. This is one end of the box here, that classic IBM blue. Very nice. And if we flip it around, we can see that this was shipped to a Sears and Roebuck Co. store in Pasadena, California. That must have been where it was sold originally. Inside it's got the original styrofoam, keeping it safe, and I do have the keys. That's a nice feature. And that's it. That's all that came with this. I'm gonna pull this out. This is a IBM PS2 Model 55SX, and it's in pretty good physical shape. I haven't turned this on in years, but the last time I did, it did power up and everything seemed okay. Hopefully that is still the case. I don't know that this model is a particularly desirable one. Some are kind of cooler and more interesting than others, but it's the one I've got. And this setup you're looking at right here is why I have been thinking about Token Ring since like 1998. My dad used to own computer stores in the late 90s and early 2000s in the Puget Sound area in Washington State. And one of the strategies he would employ, because back then you could make a lot of money on used gear, is you would buy massive lots from companies when they were cycling out all their old computers and upgrading, which was very common back then. If that late 90s computer business stuff is interesting to you at all, I actually have an interview I did with my dad about a year ago, and I'll link that down in the description. He would buy old lots from like financial institutions and schools and banks. And in the late 90s, the PS2 had basically lost out to the PC. And so companies were dumping this stuff and switching over to PC. And one of the big piles of stuff he bought, I'm talking like pallets and pallets, was a ton of these PS2 units and just buckets of this Token Ring gear. This MAU model included, not this exact one, I bought this on eBay, but this exact 8228, tons of the OG IBM cables. These are like some aftermarket whatevers. And at one point, I was allowed to take home a MAU, a bunch of cables, 2 of these PS2s, the pizza box or whatever style they call this, the desktop style. And I was trying to hook them up in my room, and I connected everything up. And of course, I was like 10 years old or something and didn't know how to use DOS, and they probably didn't even have hard drives, and I never got anywhere with it. But I loved how it looked. And I remember having 2 of these, 1 of these all kind of hooked up before Dad eventually took it away and sold it. I never got to keep it. And I've been thinking about it ever since. And so this is one of the driving factors of trying to get Token Ring set up. In a future video, we will revive this thing. And once we have a working ring network, we'll get this thing on it. This PS2 deserves an entire video on its own. So definitely subscribe if you want to see this getting on the Token Ring network in the future. And furthermore, I don't even have a Token Ring network yet. I'm going to try some simpler machines, get a couple of those online in this video. But there's one more pile of hardware to show you to illustrate this Token Ring journey we're going to be on for a while. In yet another follow-up video, I'd like to get the Token Ring network on the internet. And the only way to do that will be to bridge it with an Ethernet network. Modern might not be the right word here, but a slightly newer Ethernet network than this Token Ring stuff. And we're going to use the Cisco 7200 series of routers. I've got a bunch of these. These are my favorite router ever, by the way. These big routers take what are called port adapters, modular cards you can insert to get different capabilities. And I've collected 3 Token Ring port adapters, 2 of these DB9 ones and 1 of these RJ45 ones. Somehow, some way, we'll connect one of these routers up over Token Ring to the Ring network and be able to bridge to the internet. But now it's time to start getting serious about actually building one of these Ring networks. You might have noticed this IBM Aptiva floating around in the background. I'd like to get some era-appropriate, probably Windows 95 machines on the Ring, at least 2 of them. And we're going to try to revive this IBM Aptiva. I already hinted at the Thinkpad here. We'll start with this guy. I've never turned it on. I don't know the condition it's in. I don't even know if it works. I know this one works, so we'll save him for last. So machines to hook up are kind of a prerequisite, because remember, the MAU is totally passive. I can't just hook it up and manage it and see what it's doing. I need machines to get in the Ring network. First things first. Might be a little slower than it used to be. I drove all the way to Kansas for this beautiful baby. I picked this thing up in a massive lot of stuff from Winman 486. I'll link his channel down below. I've got a video on Patreon kicking around, going over all that stuff before it makes its way slowly but surely to the main channel. And it's in pretty rough condition, but I've glanced inside and I don't see anything telling me it's not gonna work, other than it's, you know, really dirty. So we'll clean all this off. It's got some definite gunk buildup here. Probably worked better when it was newer, but you actually pull the case off towards you on the front. Let's see if I can manage this. Yeah, some clips come loose and the whole thing kind of slides out. It's pretty weird. There's like some rails on the bottom or something. Let me get this off. got some things kicking around inside. The faceplate, it's an Aptiva model 2176-C73, whatever that means. And then there's some super glue inside as well, so that's probably a good sign. Like I showed early in the video, it does have a Hitachi Death Star inside, 2005. Amazingly, I highly doubt that works, but we're gonna find out. The Death Star joke is a little tongue-in-cheek. This Hitachi drive is probably totally fine. IBM sold their Death Star line to Hitachi in the early 2000s, and it was actually one specific Death Star, the IBM 75GXP, which infamously became known as the Death Star because the error rates were so ridiculously high. It's got an ISA ThinNet card, I believe. Yet another networking technology, Ethernet that time, that I'll be covering. I'm gearing up for that if this token ring stuff doesn't scare you away, but we won't be needing that. Closer look at this bad boy. This is actually pretty relevant. This ThinNet would have been competing with token ring pretty heavily back in the day, so we'll be covering that in the future. Despite the 2005 hard drive, I'm almost certain this is a mid-90s machine. I'm seeing a 1995 date code over here on this ridiculous riser. It's got a bunch of ISA slots, 2 PCI, so that's nice. To give myself even the slightest chance of succeeding today, we'll probably open up this PCI token ring card. It's got Windows 95 drivers inside, and that's what we're going to try to turn this baby into, a Windows 95 rig, which I have wanted for a long time. I mean, obviously I used to have Windows 95 machines back in 1995, but anyway, we're not going to spend too much time going over this machine specifically. I just need to get it on the token ring network. I'll probably pop that off, take a look at that, put some new paste on there. We've got some RAM. I think we have everything we need to run the thing. The only thing that really concerns me is the amount of crap in the power supply. Just gunk. So I am unfortunately going to have to pull that and take it apart. And hopefully it works, because correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's some typical AT power stuff going on down here, but we've got these funky connectors coming out here. I'm guessing this is a proprietary IBM power supply. So if it doesn't work, we're going to have to pursue another machine. I think I got everything unhooked. I have not worked on a computer of this vintage in, man, 20 plus years. I'm rusty. It's certainly not my strong suit. Oh yeah, that would have smelled really good after it turned on. This stuff doesn't really look like it's gonna just blow off with air. I'm gonna try that first. Obviously, oh jeez. Yeah, I'd rather not have to strip this whole thing down, so I'm gonna go blow this with air and see what happens. This came out pretty good, actually. There's like some residual, sort of more grimy dust, but I'm not worried about that, to be honest. I'm not gonna strip it down. I think this is good enough, and I was blasting it at like 100 PSI. It took quite a bit of effort to get this gunk off, but I think you'll agree it looks a lot better. Nothing caked up in the... I just spilled the screws all over the floor. But as I was saying, knocked off all the bad stuff. I'm going to pop that back in. I'm feeling good about this. I'm loath to do it, but I need to clean this fan too. So I'm going to take this guy off and knock at least the big stuff off. Just took the heatsink off, and it has recently been cleaned, and it looks like it is so this was a waste of my time, and it looks like an Pentium, Intel Pentium, so that's pretty exciting. I'll put a little more goop on there and slap the heatsink back on. Better look at that Pentium before I cover it up. Gotta love that. Got everything connected back up here. Only lost one of the power supply screws when I flew them off the bench, so we're calling that a win. I definitely did not take all the dust I could have out of this thing, because I can't be bothered. I'm trying to get ringed up. It's unclear to me if this power switch is on or off. So I'm gonna flip the power on to the machine now. It tried. Let's press this. Okay. Oh, that drive sounds terrible. Look at that. If we get a post, I don't care about the drive. That drive sounds immensely bad. All right, I'm going to let it do its thing. This is incredibly good news. We could deal with the drive. We've got 64 megs of RAM. This is going to be a ripper on Windows 95. It's complaining about configuration changes because it's IBM. That's fine. Probably because I pulled that card. Pentium 200 megahertz with 64 megs of RAM. That is fantastic. Got an ATI Mach 64 in there with 2 megs of video memory. That's good. It seems to know about an 8 gig hard drive. So that must be that Hitachi Desk Star. I keep calling it a Death Star because someone wrote on that. Yeah, that's not right, actually. The disk is 40 gigs. Maybe the drive is fine. That horrendous noise was this thing spinning. Wonder what's on there. Might need to replace that. That sounded terrible. It's much more quiet now, just some noisy fans. At any rate, it still thinks hard drive 1 is 8 gigs when it's 40. So, okay, let's see if we can't save and exit and just see what it does. Come on, baby. Ooh, what's that, like, video issue? Windows 95. Yes! We're in. Oh, yeah. Oh, look, and it's got my favorite desktop. Yes! Oh, we don't even have to do anything. Doesn't really work. Mouse doesn't work. Can't click. Uh-oh. Oh, there she... Oh, she just had to load up all the extras here. This hard drive is not long for this world. There it goes. Remember this thing? Oh, yeah, dude. Oh, maybe it thinks it's 8 gigs because is that the max Windows 95 would support? Anyway, we're going to stop talking about this. Let's get some token ring stuff. Let's get that token ring card in here.
Well, I just filmed a ridiculous amount of footage with my microphone off. Here I am unboxing this PCI card and taking a look at how sweet it looks. It's pretty cool to see a card from 1997 that's not covered in dust and everything. It's just like pristine. I think 3Com did this like yellow coloring in their logo. Really nice looking card. Because this was complete in box, of course I got the drivers, a couple diskettes, and on CD-ROM, and that CD-ROM is like peak 90s aesthetic. In a supreme act of hubris, I put the card in the case, put it all back together, cleaned it up a little bit. It's not perfect by any means, but I got the basic layer of grime off. Ultimately, found out that the floppy drive wasn't working, and I couldn't get the drivers off the CD for some reason. CD-ROM appears to work just fine. Took a look inside, and I had not connected the ribbon cable to the floppy drive correctly. You can see I missed a pin there, so I got that back together. Floppy drive was still broken. Swapped it out for another one, and got a little further, but I needed a Windows 95 CD to wrap things up, and then the machine kept crashing, and so right now I'm burning a copy of Windows 95.
Long story short, I got it working. It's installed, drivers are there. The stability of this Windows 95 install is getting pretty questionable. And yeah, there, the mouse just froze. That's probably fine. And I might have to install, oh, we're back. Might have to install the TCP IP stack. We'll see about that. Well, let's move on to the Thinkpad. Pretty sure I'm going to need a Windows 95 boot floppy to get Windows 95 on that Thinkpad. And the nice thing about this now is I think I can make it right here. It's probably a blessing I lost all the audio. You don't want to see all that pain. Let's see here. So I think we go to Add Remove Programs. We can make a startup disk. And it wants the Windows 95 install media. I have just copied that over to the C drive, which is a pretty typical thing to do. So let's see if that works. Oh my. It froze again. Come on, baby. We're back. We're back. Everything's cool. Everything's cool. What the heck? C Win95. Oh, it's probably this one. Win95, Win95. What do you guys think? Oh yeah, there we go. I did it wrong. Okay, I already have a disk in. The computer has froze again. This is not good. Why does the mouse keep freezing? It always comes back. Now it's frozen, clicking the button. We've got a bad driver or some device it doesn't like. Oh, there we go. Floppy disk is roaring to life. Okay, I'm making the disk. Let's look at the Thinkpad. This will be our second computer on our token ring network. This is an IBM Thinkpad 380ED. I think it came out in like 1997, but would have shipped with Windows 95, and that's what we're going to try to put on it. Open this guy up. It also has an Intel Pentium inside, MMX, and you can see the 380ED logo right there. I got this basically for the cost of shipping, which is a donation in my book from the folks over at Free Geek Twin Cities. Y2K Man 2K on the Serial Port Discord arranged the whole thing, so a huge thanks to all of those folks. It's in really good, clean physical condition. It has, I think, the original hard drive, and it works. I think it's got FreeDOS or something on it. We'll boot it up in a second. The only issue with it is the screen is kind of dying in this section. You'll see that when we boot up, but that is no big deal at all. Came with the original IBM power supply. Let's get this thing plugged in. And it's pretty thick. There's my phone, just for comparison. It's kind of hard to portray this on video sometimes. This thing is very, very tall and quite heavy. But with the size comes certain benefits, I think. It's a very nice feeling keyboard. It's probably nearly full size. I have pretty big hands. I could type comfortably on this. No problem. Sort of unique. The power switch is right here, I think. Get it booted up. This one's going to be a little hard to film. It's booting into FreeDOS right now. Maybe I'll get a monitor hooked up to it. I was wrong. This section of the screen is kind of dying away. That's not from the camera. That's actually what the screen looks like. And there's a little bit of it up here as well. So what we're going to do is try to get Windows 95 on this thing with my freshly minted media here, though I suspect I probably could get that PC MCAA card working over DOS, but who needs that? I guess I'm just going to pop this in. Can I just Control-Delete? I don't even know. Yeah. I think it's trying to boot from the disk. I can hear it making noise. It's doing something. All this Windows stuff is actually what's going to slow me down. Not to say that Windows is bad. I'm just a little rusty on how to get things set up and drivers and all those headaches from the Windows 95 era. It's actually going to be the harder part of this video as compared to the token ring, I suspect. I'm getting the impression that it doesn't like this boot disk. I'm going to crack a beer and mess around with this and save you the pain. Everything is going really, really well. Actually, this is too weird not to show you. Like, weird might not be the right word. It's just unfamiliar to me. I've never seen this before. This is the, oh, we got a mouse and everything. This is like the BIOS, I guess you could say. It does see the PC card slot. We're gonna need that. If you just go to the floppy drive, like, am I booting from that? It says okay now. No, don't. It's checking everything. Check out this flying bird cursor. Someone worked on that. Oh yeah. I spent a couple hours last night trying to get this thing to boot, and I can only ever get the blinking cursor when I try to boot from any media. So here's that Windows 95 boot disk I just made. I'm going to stick it in. The floppy drive's fine. I can go to the A drive and list the files. Everything's working great. So I thought, well, maybe it just doesn't like this boot disk. So I got out the Grease Weasel, which is a device that lets me interface with a modern PC on the USB, and I wrote a known good Windows 95 boot disk to this. Same deal, blinking cursor. Gave up on all of this and moved over to a Windows 98 bootable disk. And one time I was able to get it to show the boot menu, you know, to go to hard drive or the disk. Chose to boot from the disk and blinking cursor. So I think I'm just doing something wrong. I can't get this thing to boot with any bootable media, known good boot disks and everything. Some IBM funny business going on. But then I realized I don't even need a boot disk. I already have DOS. I can just go to the CD-ROM drive and run the Windows 95 setup. So that's what I'm going to do. Look at that. I'm going to run through this, and hopefully when I come back, we'll be trying to throw this PC MCAA card in this thing. Finished the installer and restarted the computer for the first time to complete setup, and blinking cursor. I think we have a hard drive problem. This is getting way more involved than I would prefer. With the hard drive pulled, I can successfully boot from my floppy disk. Okay. The laptop's out. This son of a bitch is in. We got to get this video back on track. I cannot get this thing to behave when there's a hard drive installed. I even tried this unholy combination, an NVMe to laptop ID hard drive adapter thing. Same exact behavior as the real hard drive. When there's a hard drive with DOS partitions in it, this thing kind of, I think, just tries to boot right to it, and you get the blinking cursor. If it's a totally blank, unpartitioned hard drive, or no hard drive, behaves perfectly. I can boot from the CD-ROM, I can boot from the floppy, and yes, I have confirmed the boot order in the BIOS. My brain is not that smooth. Something funny going on with this thing, maybe some IBM boot order funny business I don't understand. Hopefully not a hardware fault. It passes all its like self-checks and everything. Well, let's get this out of here, and we're gonna get this thing working. It also has a Pentium. I scrounged up an AGP graphics card for it. I stole this stick of RAM from a Cisco Pix firewall, but she posts. We have a runner. I need to go find basically everything for this thing. I need a floppy drive, I need a CD-ROM, I need a hard drive. Oh, let's use this. The Quantum Bigfoot. Look at that thing. I picked this up at VCF Midwest last year. Yeah, I'm definitely throwing this in there. I'm going to get this all put together, and I'm really actually going to install Windows on it, and then we'll return to the token ring. It's not going to win any beauty contests, and this Bigfoot drive is definitely physically damaged. It's totally toast, which is sort of a bummer because it was sold to me as tested working. But that's alright, I got a 2 gig compact flash card. That is our hard drive now, and we are running Windows 95. Let's try getting one of these IBM ISA token ring cards in this bad boy, and we will begin our next boss battle, which will be getting this thing to work with Windows. Wow. Windows auto-detected it, and it wants me to provide a workgroup name. That makes sense. What should we call this thing? The badge on the front says KST. Oh man. That is okay. Put this on the hard drive just like last time, because I knew I was going to have to deal with this. Restarting. Oh, it always showed up in the ISA plug-and-play device listing in the BIOS post, or whatever this screen is called, by the way. Wow, it just works. If we have any trouble with that PCI card that we threw in the Aptiva, I'm just going to use another one of these ISA cards. That was super simple. We finally have 2 working Windows 95 machines with token ring hardware inside. Let's finally try to build a token ring network and get them connected. I don't really have a good grasp on how to proceed at the moment. I guess I'll just hook both computers up and turn them on and see what happens. But there is an unfortunate aspect of this MAU that I have been withholding until now, and all the token ring experts out there have been on the edge of their seats waiting for me to stumble on this issue, but I knew about it. This 8228 would have shipped with something called a setup aid tool, and I don't have one of those. When you connect a machine up to the ring, in token ring parlance, the machine is called a ring station, and for whatever reason, the cable connecting the machine to the MAU is called a lobe. So this is a lobe. The token ring cards are very sophisticated. They do a bunch of checking on the lobe to make sure it's healthy and that they can get on the MAU and everything is okay. In fact, it's my understanding that this is one of the reasons token ring sort of lost out. These cards are much more complex, generally speaking, than an Ethernet card needs to be because of all this extra stuff going on. A lobe check will be performed along with other error checks to constantly make sure that the ring station or computer is healthy and that this lobe is okay. If you think about the ring topology, it's incredibly critical that the ring remain complete because the token, and therefore the data, has to pass around the ring and you can't have a break in it. Otherwise the whole thing just doesn't work. So what can happen, and this is just my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, is these checks can take place, and basically if something's wrong with the lobe, this port finds out, and it will actually physically disconnect itself from the rest of the ring, right? And then the ring reforms, and this one's no longer part of the party. In our example here, if ring station 3 is misbehaving, this port can be literally physically disconnected. And what can happen is, it just stays that way. And so if I come along with another machine, 2 days later and try to plug it in, it's still disconnected. This is a passive device that just reacts to voltages coming on the line and relays clicking back and forth to disconnect or connect this thing. And so you would have the setup aid that you would plug in here to basically reset this port, for lack of a better word, and get it ready, and it's reset to accept new ring stations. What it means in practical terms is that one or more of these, or all of them maybe, are in a situation where they don't actually allow the computer you're plugging in to join the ring. And that's what the setup aid is for. You plug that in and reset it. The good news is there are diagrams online for how to build them. It's just a couple of resistors and an LED and a 9-volt battery. And if we have to build one, I've got a couple of these type 1 connectors that just got cut out of their prior installation, and surprisingly hard to open up, but it wasn't pretty. I got this one open, and we can just strip the 4 wires and make whatever type of connector we want. We'll see if we need to do that. I've been reading the Token Ring Architecture Reference from 1986 so that you don't have to. Here's the section about all the phases one of these cards goes through as a station connects to the ring. You can see that lobe test I was talking about. and on and on and on. I guess we'll start with this no-name machine I just set up because I kind of trust the Windows 95 setup a little better. We'll put it on port 1. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to tell that it's behaving or what when it gets on there without a second computer, but we'll have it turned around here to maybe examine the activity indicators or something like that. I'm not sure. And then those relays I was talking about in the MAU, it's my understanding that we should be able to hear them click. It might not come up on my microphone, but maybe I'll be able to hear these relays clicking and clacking and trying to decide if the lobe's okay and forming a ring. How do you like this grimy keyboard? It was the only one I had with the bigger style XT connector, and I can't find my XT to PS2 adapter, so that's what we've got. Got this machine connected and powered up, and the amber and green light on the back are just blinking back and forth. I have to imagine that's not a success state, so I'm going to try flipping it between a couple MAU ports to see if it makes any difference, and go from there. I can't remember, or I should say I don't know if you're supposed to do this while the machine is running. This thing's making no noise, by the way. No difference. Yeah, it did them all, nothing. Still just blinking away. Fire up the other machine just for good measure. Got the Aptiva plugged in and in the Ring network, or at least physically attached. I'm going to have to rethink my setup here. I only have one mouse. I need to hunt down another one. I only have one monitor. Kind of a mess. However, I heard this thing clicking. I just heard it click again. It's trying to do something. Same blinking light behavior on the back of this one though, and I don't see any indicators on the other card. Yeah, this thing is definitely making little clicking sounds. Port 7 is the Aptiva. I must say, it's not working yet, but I'm getting pretty excited for how things are looking. Our first official blue screen of death of the day. This used to be real common. All I did was install the TCP IP stack, and as it was restarting, it did this. Let's see if it's still alive. Gonna need a hard reboot. And I probably hosed my Windows 95 install doing something completely mundane. Remember doing this all the time? Because Windows can't shut down properly ever. Maybe we're okay. Let me show you where I'm at and the troubleshooting I've done so far. I've installed the TCP IP stack on both machines. By default, out of the box, Windows comes with IPX and NetBEUI. I always say NetBEUI in my head. Is that what people call that? NetBEUI is just so you can like share folders and stuff. There's no IPs, there's no notion of pinging, and that's why I want TCP IP so I can start pinging the machines back and forth. I'm just more comfortable with that. But out of the box, you get NetBEUI, if that's how you say that. And you know, you'd go to Network Neighborhood and you'd see other computers on the same network in the same work group. Got that installed, got an IP on this machine. This is the machine with the ISA card. But if we go to run winipconfig, it fails. It says it can't read the IP configuration, which sort of feels like a hardware issue, perhaps related to our blinking lights down there. I don't know. I've also installed TCP IP on the Aptiva, which I don't have a mouse for, so I am doing this entirely from the keyboard, which is not as hard as you might think. Let's give this thing an IP like that. We might have to restart. Okay. Once more Windows stuff. Always put your Windows 95 install on your hard drive. It's just so much simpler. Had to restart, of course, but now with the IP assign that you just saw me do, if I do winipconfig, this thing sees the adapter, its MAC address, the IP I just gave it. I think this thing is behaving perfectly. I would expect to be able to get in this situation with the other one. I think there's either a hardware or configuration problem. Before diving into the MAU reset tool, I think I'm going to pull this card because I have 3 more of them that we can try. Actually, I'm just noticing one's a slightly different variant. There's not a whole lot of information about token ring out there beyond just the high-level stuff. It's a ring with a token. I was like, yeah, I get that part. So, I can't even find the manual on these or anything. I'm going to pop this different looking one in just for good measure. This is another one of the cards. I've been messing around with tons of settings, and you can see it's behaving differently now. The blinking orange, and I just plugged that cable in. It went solid green. I heard the MAU clicking, and the card was trying to talk to it. I've mucked around with a ton of different settings, and I had to reset a bunch of stuff in the BIOS, and I was getting IRQ conflicts, and you can see Windows still isn't really happy with this card physically, but we don't have any interrupt conflicts. I had to disable one of the COM ports to get this far. It claims there's resource conflict though, even though it won't tell me what they are. It doesn't report anything here in the conflict list. I still have the same problem with WinIPconfig, fatal error. And if we try to ping something, I get error code 143, which I think means the TCP IP stack just can't come up. So still maybe some problems with this card or drivers. I'm going to keep messing around. When I restart the computer, we hear a click on the MAU. This light goes green for a while. I just heard another click, and then a few moments later another click and blinking yellow. So it's trying something. Finally found some documentation. Blinking amber and the green off means the adapter is closed, a problem exists. So it is actually trying to do stuff and detect a problem. We did see it with amber off and green on, just briefly, meaning everything was operational. So I think it's trying to talk to the MAU and failing. I still can't run IPconfig. I think there's a TCP IP stack issue on this machine, which may or may not be related to the ISA card. I think it's time to build a setup tool. I was going to use these Type 1 connectors with the cables cut off and solder these into a setup aid tool using the diagram I found online. And then this thing showed up in the mail from eBay and sort of inspired me. This is one of the Type 1 to DB9 connector cables. And I don't know if it's an IBM branded cable, I don't think it is, but hopefully you can tell it's a lot thicker and heftier and a little more serious than these kind of homemade ones that I picked up. This is much more like the IBM token ring wiring gear that I remember from when I was a kid. But I've got these little DB9 breakouts, and so nothing's stopping me from just doing one of these, getting a breadboard, build the circuit over here, and then I can plug this in, or I can even convert one of these RJ45s over and figure out which pins are which and get it all hooked up. And that's pretty nice because then I can just plug it into the MAU and the circuit's way over here, not getting disturbed or anything. I'm going to build one. Wow, what could possibly go wrong? The circuit only uses the red and orange wires of the token ring cable, so I've color-coded those and beeped them out with the multimeter appropriately, I think. 9-volt battery coming in. I believe I have successfully recreated that circuit I'm showing you on the screen right here. And presumably when we plug it into the MAU, it's going to short, these two wires and do something meaningful with that information, I guess. Let's see how it behaves. Can't decide if this is good or bad. The light comes on when I plug in the cable to my setup aid. Nothing plugged in over there. Why would plugging this in cross two of those wires? I must have beeped this out wrong. I built another one for this adapter, the RJ45 to Type 1, and it behaves identically. Light turns on. I think that's okay. I think that actually makes sense. I also don't think we can really hurt this MAU very much. So what we should see is this light will stay on initially when I plug this in, and then it's supposed to fade out, and we should hear a click, and then we wait a few seconds. It says 4 seconds to pull this out, and the port should be reset. So here goes nothing. That seems bad. Maybe this port's fine. Maybe the MAU's okay. Is that what that means? I think I figured it out by reading the DIY setup aid instructions. It mentions 2 short circuit bridges at the front of the plug. When this thing is unplugged, there's some sort of physical switch that's being engaged and shorting the 2 wires like we're seeing here. That's why the light's turning on. So if I take the end of my one I was taking apart and I pop that in there, it disengages that short circuit loopback feature. So I don't know if that's going to cause a problem when it's inserted into the MAU. Presumably the MAU would also do that, I guess. Let me see if I can disengage that somehow on one of these. If I stick a plastic smudger in there, I can just kind of lean up against the pins as if they're engaged, and you can see the light. The light turns off. So how do I permanently disengage that? Well, I can't see a way to permanently disengage that bridging loopback feature, but I also don't think it matters in terms of testing this thing and resetting it. The moment you insert it, those pins are physically separated and the MAU should just be operating as if the cable's plugged in, right? And so I think the idea was If you built one of these like all-in-one things, not like plugging in a cable and carrying this around and only using it when you needed to, you'd be draining your 9-volt battery all the time. I think that's the only reason that matters. I think we're back at square one, and the setup aid hasn't taught us much except that when put in, it does nothing. It's acting like the ports are fine? I don't know. Here's the deal. We're calling in the reinforcements. And this is somehow becoming the most collab retro video ever. Somehow everything I own is making its way onto the workbench. A Cisco 7204 is involved now. I've got a token ring card in here. I don't know if it's compatible with the iOS version on this, but we'll just swap it out for another 7204 if that doesn't work. I was looking at the Cisco documentation, and you can actually inspect the status of the connection. It'll tell you if it's in the ring. Hopefully, it'll tell us about errors from the ring. And of course, we've got the nice indicators you would expect, the speed, INTs, I think that stands for inserted, so whether this port's in the ring. I'm gonna get this thing fired up and start poking around. The best case scenario is that this thing is able to join in the ring, a ring with one token station, but that is still possible. And then we can slowly introduce the computers back in and see where we get. Here's the view I've had for the last 2 hours. I've got everything hooked up to the MAU. I've tried to reset it a bunch of times. Same behavior. I get the same clicking and clacking that the PC's always produced, so I haven't heard it with our little setup adapter excursion. I've got 2 token ring cards inside the Cisco unit. This one down here with the DB9 connector is set to be online, and it is basically continually looping, trying to get inserted into the ring. Let me show you what the logs look like.
Here I am configuring that token ring interface. It happens to be token ring interface 40 on the router with that D-sub connector inside of it. We're going to bring it up, and I've got additional debug logging taking place, so you can see changing state to initializing here. It's trying to open the adapter, get in the ring. The light comes on the interface when that happens, and then a few moments later we get an open failed lobe test failure. So something's going on with the MAU.
So we're stuck with the MAU not operating the way at least I'm expecting it to. And you can't just take 2 of these cables like crossover style and plug 2 computers directly in and make a ring. Doesn't work that way the same way Ethernet does. The MAU, or some sort of token ring hub, is a pretty critical piece of infrastructure to establish the ring. So either this MAU is totally broken, or much more likely, and hopefully this is the case, I'm just creating this little setup tool wrong, or it just doesn't work. I've recreated this circuit several times, double checked it. I think I'm making it correctly. It doesn't seem to have any effect. When I plug it in, I never hear the relays click or anything like that. This is getting a little out of hand, so I think I'm going to regroup and call it here. I'm pretty sure I have a MAU issue, but I'm also not very sure. It's totally possible. I don't know how to configure these token ring cards properly, and I don't know how to debug them, but I have good news. I've got stuff on the way from eBay. More PCI token ring cards, another MAU, whatever this thing is, and a lot of token ring stuff has shown up as I've been filming this video that we're going to explore. MX Shift just popped another complete inbox PC MCIA token ring adapter in the mail. We'll get that working in that IBM Thinkpad or another laptop in the future. This is just the beginning. And if you're fiending for more token ring content, go check out IBM Museum's channel. He's got tons of token ring content. Also, a patron of mine reached out and put me in touch with someone in my area that has an original 8228 setup aid that I might be able to borrow and see if we can't get this MAU working just fine. As I mentioned before, do not worry, this is just the beginning of a huge series of token ring videos. Once we get the ring working, another awesome thing to do would be to get this IBM RS6000 on the token ring. That might be one of the most appropriate machines to throw on this network that I can think of. I also wanted to throw it out there that my $5 and up patrons get access to the Serial Port Discord. You of course get access to that Discord if you are a Serial Port patron as well. And I've spun up a token ring channel there to share token ring stories, debug, get help, and just generally talk about anything token ring. So definitely go check out my Patreon page if you think that's something that might be interesting. I really hate leaving videos unfinished like this, but we did cover a lot of ground. I know a lot more than when I started a few days ago, and I just don't have the stuff that I need to continue yet. I'm not gonna have a bunch of this stuff for over a week, and I wanted to get this out into the world. I suspect a lot of you out there that have dealt with token ring will have tons of comments about what I'm missing, what I could try, what I should troubleshoot. So definitely leave those down in the comments below. I do read them, I will respond, and I would really appreciate that. I hope this video has given you a taste of the saga we have just embarked on, discovering token ring over the course of this year. and I hope I see you in the next video.